If denial were a sport, tonight's subject would be undefeated. I'm Ethan Blake, and we've got front row seats to a gold medal performance in mental gymnastics. With every word, they dodge facts like dodgeballs and serve delusion like it's dessert. But I'm here to call the fouls, replay the stumbles, and throw shade so sharp it leaves a mark. This isn't commentary, it's comedy with consequences. So grab your scorecards, folks. Let's judge this performance not by its grace, but by how loudly it collapses under its own contradictions.
Comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens now, with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow. Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's, and I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that was their first new media.
It is new media, because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
The woke propaganda machine is in overdrive, but Bill Maher just slammed the brakes on it. Known for calling out absurdities on both sides, the liberal comedian isn't pulling punches, even when it comes to his own camp. This time, Maher dismantled an MSNBC host who eagerly jumped on the tired old Trump derangement train. So what exactly did the host say that pushed Maher over the edge? And how did Maher's savage response leave the network scrambling to recover? Don't worry, I've got all the juicy details lined up. You won't want to miss this takedown. Maher's honesty cuts through the noise like a knife, and it's making waves across the media landscape. Stick around, because this one's about to get heated. And if you haven't subscribed already, now's the time. Hit that button, and stay tuned for more fiery breakdowns just like this.
Ken Martin?
Yep.
I was not aware of who he was before. I did not think it got off to a great start, because I think they need to completely reroute themselves, and I don't think they did it. What do you think?
Let's pause for a second and really focus on the question and Chris Hayes' response. The question was simple. Bill Maher asked how Democrats intend to regroup after their repeated election losses to Donald Trump. A fair, direct question. Now, pay close attention to how Hayes answers. It says a lot about where the party's mindset truly is.
I think there's sort of two different imperatives that are in a little bit of tension with each other. So one, I think there's an imperative right now for the party to stand up against the most destructive things that Musk and Trump are doing. And I think they're doing some genuinely destructive things. I mean, there's people walking around the world right now with like devices inside their bodies from clinical trials sponsored by USAID that they can't get out. The guards that were guarding ISIS prisoners in Syria were paid on USAID salaries that got cut off. There's a 25-year-old mucking around the code base of the Treasury system. So there's things they have to do to try to oppose. But it's also the case that like all of the reflection that happened after losing that election and trying to figure about how do you win back people you lost was real and true. And I guess my feeling is you gotta fight, you gotta try different things, and you have to be authentic. You can't like reverse engineer any of this off a blueprint. And I really think this is true about politics. Steve Jobs once said, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. Like, it's our job. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Barack Obama off of George W. Bush. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Donald Trump off of Barack Obama. What happens in the end of an election is everyone sifts through the data and they come up with their perfect, their plan based on, well, this worked and with this group and we got attack here and there. And what politics about is a certain point is like innovation and communication. You got to come up with new stories.
So, if you listen to Chris Hayes, it's not up to the customer to decide what they want. And it's certainly not up to the voters to choose who they support. No. In the Democrat worldview he's echoing, that choice belongs to the party elites. They get to decide what's best for you, even if you completely disagree. Sounds ridiculous, right? But that's the logic on display. And just wait. Bill Maher isn't about to let that slide without delivering a takedown that cuts straight through the nonsense.
Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's it. And I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
Bill Maher shut Chris Hayes down with just one brutal sentence. People didn't like the message. That was it. Game over. While Hayes spun a web of political jargon about reverse engineering election strategies and trying to fight on two fronts, Maher went straight to the core issue with brutal clarity. It's not that voters didn't understand the Democrats' message, it's that they did, and they rejected it. Hayes, like many on the left, tried to frame the losses as a communications problem, as if better slogans or smoother talking points could magically sway the electorate. But Maher wasn't buying it. His point was simple and devastating. Voters are not confused. They are fed up. The product, the policies, the priorities, the tone doesn't align with what everyday Americans want. Period. Rather than admit that the party may be out of step with voters, Hayes danced around the real issue, showing just how disconnected elite media voices can be from the public pulse. Maher's reply stripped away all the spin. No strategy can overcome a message people don't believe in. Until Democrats confront that reality, the losses will keep piling up. And if you think that was sharp, just wait until you hear Hayes' next misstep.
I think that I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had a moment across the political spectrum of some form of progressive communication that's either left them bewildered or a little like, I don't know about that. But I also think at the same time, there is a message of what I would call like common sense, patriotic pluralism. Yeah. That is a majority message, which is like, if some father and mother have health care for their kid lined up who's trans, just stay the fuck out of their business. Let them make that decision. That's their decision to make. And you don't have to make that for your family.
You've got to love how the woke mob on the left constantly tries to blur the lines of the real debate. In this case, Chris Hayes claims that if parents have lined up gender-affirming care for their children, then they should be allowed to move forward, and that it's nobody else's concern. Sounds simple, right? But that's not actually the argument being made, and it's certainly not the broader agenda the left has been advancing. Bill Maher, never one to shy away from uncomfortable truths, jumps in immediately and cuts through the spin.
But the argument is whether the child should make the decision.
But the child is never making the decision. The parents are always making the decision. Parents consent to medical care.
Well, here in California, you're allowed to hide it from the parents if the kid is.
Yes.
Thank you, one person who knows that.
But I mean,
somebody knows that is the case.
Exactly. What the left was really advocating for wasn't just parental choice or supporting vulnerable kids. It was something far more radical, handing over the authority to schools and bureaucrats to withhold critical, life-altering information about a child's gender transition from their own parents. Let that sink in. The very individuals legally and morally responsible for raising and protecting their children could be cut out of the most intimate, consequential decisions about their child's mental and physical health. This wasn't about compassion. It was about control. And now, just months after the election, the left is already trying to walk it all back. They're scrambling to soften the rhetoric, reframe the debate, and pretend that was never their official stance. Can you blame them? If my platform involved stripping parents of their rights in favor of unelected school officials, I'd be running from it too. The truth is, this kind of dystopian overreach doesn't sit well with the average American, Democrat, Republican, or independent. This goes beyond political differences. It's about preserving the most fundamental building block of society, the family unit. When government institutions presume to know better than parents, when schools are empowered to act in secrecy and make permanent decisions behind closed doors, that's not progress. That's authoritarianism in disguise. And deep down, even the left knows it. That's why they're pivoting, denying, and desperately hoping voters forget just how far they were willing to go. But voters didn't forget. They saw the absurdity. They recognized the threat to parental authority, and they responded by walking away from a party that seems more interested in pushing fringe ideologies than addressing real-world concerns. It's not that Democrats didn't have a message in the last election, it's that their message was so bizarre, disconnected, and extreme that it repelled the very voters they needed most. The media tried to cover it up, spinning every overreach as progress and framing critics as intolerant. But that narrative fell apart when confronted with the plain truth, and that's where new media stepped in. Independent voices, digital platforms, and truth tellers, people like Bill Maher, cut through the noise. They dared to ask the uncomfortable questions that legacy outlets wouldn't touch. And when Maher confronted a left-leaning guest with this harsh reality, her response said it all. She had no rebuttal, no defense, just empty talking points that fell flat under scrutiny. Because at the end of the day, reality wins. Parents aren't the enemy. And the American people are done pretending that common sense is controversial.
What do you think of the Trump White House admitting more influencers and podcasters into the press corps? Yeah, the press room is different. I mean, it reflects America.
I think it's great.
Yeah, you do.
But it's mostly right-wing influencers and podcasters, obviously, but I think it's a good step. I mean, this is how people are getting their news.
It is. I mean, how can you deny it?
I was actually over there the other day, and it's packed in there. And I think even all the reporters, whether you're Legacy or the podcasting people, they're all happy. And then they have like the one rotating chair, which I guess is pretty cool. So there's always like somebody new that comes in.
So this is you're at the White House, you're talking about?
Yeah.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that was their first new media.
It is new media, because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that's what Bezos bought the Washington Post for. He bought it for like $1, didn't he?
Baron Donalds delivered a bold and insightful observation, one that cuts to the heart of the media's role in the Democratic Party's recent unraveling. According to Donalds, the legacy media isn't merely an innocent bystander in the chaos, they're an active accomplice. For years, they've twisted narratives, suppressed inconvenient facts, and buried legitimate stories, all to protect a political ideology. But in doing so, they haven't just hurt their own credibility, they've created a vacuum. And into that vacuum stepped the independent media. What's even more revealing is how defenders of the legacy press are trying to downplay the rise of this new wave of media voices. A guest on a recent panel tried to dismiss Donald Trump's idea of inviting podcasters and independent journalists to the White House. Her reasoning? Axios, one of the platforms mentioned, had been around too long to qualify as new media and was bought for $500 million. That was supposed to be a mic drop moment, as if age or a buyout price disqualifies a platform from being independent or credible. But here's the reality check. Independence isn't measured by years in business or valuation numbers. It's measured by editorial freedom and connection with the audience. And that's exactly what most of the legacy press has lost. The establishment media can't grasp that the game has changed. Americans don't want talking heads reading from scripts or repeating party-approved talking points. They want authenticity, accountability, and a voice that reflects the frustrations and concerns of everyday people. While the old guard continues to obsess over traditional definitions, market share, and fancy studio setups, the new media movement is thriving in digital spaces, YouTube channels, Twitter feeds, Substacks, and podcasts. These platforms are run by people with a passion for truth, not ratings. And more importantly, they're trusted. They're resonating with millions of Americans who feel ignored, patronized, or gaslit by the so-called mainstream. And maybe that's exactly why the legacy media feels so threatened, because for all their resources, fancy branding, and insider access, they're losing influence. They're losing viewers. They're losing control of the narrative. Meanwhile, independent creators are shaping national conversations, breaking stories, and calling out hypocrisy in ways the legacy press won't dare to. The public is waking up, and they're turning off CNN and MSNBC in favor of voices they actually trust. Byron Donalds was spot on. The rise of independent media isn't just a trend, it's a revolution. And it's leaving legacy outlets scrambling to remain relevant in a world where spin no longer sells.
Here's where the rubber meets the road, because this is important. He wanted to, this week, he's suing the 12-member commission, the California Coastal Commission. He launches his rockets from Vandenberg Space Force Base. He used to call it Air Force Base, but I guess now we're into Space Force time. He wanted the proposal to expand the number of launches. Okay, again, one of the most impressive companies, an American company. He wants a little more, give it to him. No. The commission, some bureaucrat, said, nope, and this is the reason why. Commissioner Carol Hart saying, we're dealing with a company, the head of which has aggressively injected himself into the presidential race and made it clear what his point of view is. Yes, because he lives in America, and he can do that. It has nothing.
There's no exaggerating just how vindictive and bureaucratic the left became during their hold on power. It wasn't merely about passing progressive policies. It was about turning every layer of the federal apparatus into a weapon to push their agenda and silence opposition. Agencies that should have remained neutral suddenly acted like political enforcers, suppressing dissent and regulating free speech into near extinction. Innovation was smothered under the weight of red tape, and personal liberties were often sacrificed on the altar of ideological conformity. This wasn't principled leadership, it was punishment disguised as progress. Conservative voices weren't just debated, they were targeted. Dissenters weren't invited to dialogue, they were forced to navigate a minefield of mandates, audits, and public shaming campaigns. The goal wasn't compromise, it was compliance. Power was used not to govern fairly, but to dominate quietly and completely. Now, as the tide shifts and their grip on power weakens, it's almost comical to hear their sudden cries for transparency, fairness, and unity. The same people who once wrote the rules with an iron fist now plead for mercy. But the American public hasn't forgotten. When you govern through control and censorship, don't be surprised when people stop listening to your calls for balance.
That they're far too willing to stifle freedoms, including speech, for the sake of safety or misinformation, sometimes which is coming from everybody. It's, no one has a monopoly on it. Or just power.
You say nobody
it's just
has
power.
A monopoly on it. Come on. That's some moral relativism right there.
I said nobody has a monopoly.
You said nobody has a monopoly on it, but that's like saying nobody has a monopoly on being a billionaire. He's got that monopoly up here. I mean, he's got more money than us. A lot more money than us. So,
I don't get the.
You don't get it?
I don't know what point you're making.
Look, you're saying it's both sides.
Poor Bill Maher. Sometimes you can't help but feel a little sorry for the guy. Sure, he's razor sharp with his sarcasm, always armed with a killer clapback and never afraid to cut through the noise, but having to sit across from Joe Scarborough week after week, that's got to be mentally exhausting. So, what exactly was Scarborough's point this time? Maher made a fair, balanced observation that both the left and the right are guilty of spreading misinformation. Even Mark Cuban agreed. But instead of acknowledging this basic truth, Scarborough launched into a convoluted, rambling rant, trying to pin all disinformation on Trump and Elon Musk. In doing so, he tied himself into knots, delivering an argument so incoherent neither Maher nor Cuban could make sense of what he was actually saying. It felt like Scarborough was grasping at straws, unwilling to admit that misinformation isn't the exclusive domain of one side. But that's the problem. When you're entrenched too deeply in partisan dogma, even the simplest truths become too uncomfortable to face. And that's why Maher hit back with a perfectly brutal remark, because someone had to bring Scarborough back to reality.
Comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens now, with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow.
What an absolutely scorching takedown from Bill Maher. He didn't just offer a casual critique, he tore the entire narrative apart with surgical precision. His message wasn't just aimed at scoring political points, it was a wake-up call to the left. If Democrats want even the slightest chance of competing in future elections, they need to stop patting themselves on the back for past wins and start facing the harsh truth. This isn't about catchy slogans or relying on outdated platforms that no longer connect with the public. Americans today are facing real immediate problems, economic strain, cultural upheaval, national insecurity, and they want leaders who address them head on. They're tired of being gaslit, talked down to, or ignored entirely. Maher's message couldn't be clearer. Adapt or lose. Modernize your thinking. Stop calling every criticism right-wing extremism and start focusing on what matters to the average voter. Ignoring legitimate concerns only alienates more people. And if the left keeps retreating into their ideological bubbles, they'll continue ceding ground to candidates who are unafraid to speak plainly, even if it ruffles feathers. And on that note, we close out today's video. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one.